What's up, everyone? Renfail here. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be talking about the Dead Sun's adventure path for Starfinder, and specifically the incident at Absalom Station, which was the first book in this overall adventure path. I think there's 6 books in this path. I could be wrong. It might be 5. But this was the very first adventure path, very first adventure of any kind that they released for the Starfinder setting back when it first launched. Now, I am brand new to Starfinder. I started the Discovering Starfinder series earlier this year as a result of, the OGL fiasco with Dungeons and Dragons sort of pushing me outwards to discover other settings. And I had known about Pathfinder for years, and I'd played a couple of the games, the 2 Owlcat games that have been produced, which are great, Kingmaker and Wrath of the Righteous. But I'd never played the Pathfinder setting, and when I started researching it, I was like, "Oh wait, there's a sci-fi setting," and that got me looking into it and saying, "You know what? I think I would rather try Starfinder first rather than Pathfinder because I want to do sci-fi. I've been doing fantasy for years and years and years and years and years, so I wanted to do something different." So we just wrapped our official actual play series playing through Incident at Absalom Station, which is that first book in the Dead Sin's Adventure Path. And excuse me, this is kind of like this is a review of that and sort of my thoughts on Starfinder as a setting after having played through this first adventure path book and sort of, getting my feet wet with a lot of things. So, without further ado, we're going to be diving into all of that. So, I would say at this point, if you've never played the Incident Absalom Station, um, I know it's old and it's been out for a while, but there are people out there like me who have never played it before. So this is a spoiler alert because I am going to be talking about the storyline and some of the things I liked, some of the things I didn't like. We did a bit of a debrief last night with our group after we wrapped up and talked a little bit about some of the things that I'm going to mention today. But if you don't want things spoiled, you don't watch this video. But if you're okay with that, or if you've already played through it, or you don't care and you just want to know more about things, let's do it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. And we'll talk more about the commercial stuff in the middle of the video when I do the actual commercial. So, spoiler warning: 5, 4, 3, 2, and let's go. So, um, as an introductory book to the setting, I feel like they did a really good job with this because it's not overwhelming in terms of all the things you need to know, with the exception of the starship combat, because I feel like that is such a complex thing in and of itself that, to be honest with you, when we came to the starship combat section of this adventure path, we actually just said, screw it, we're going to come up with our own way of, we're just going to use a simplified, like, roll a d20 against an armor class of 15, and each ship has DC 15, and let's just go from there, because we wanted to simplify it, because all 4 of us looked at the starship combat section and went, oh my god, this is super complex, and that might be fun for some people, but I think for a live stream session it didn't make sense to try to fumble our way through that, because we were recording these videos for YouTube, and so you want things to be fairly straightforward and not be having lots of pausing as you go look up rules and how does this work? Oh, did we do this right? So on and so forth. So that was the one area where I will say right away we had a ton of fun throughout this thing. It was very easy to play. They ease you into things very well throughout this campaign, with the exception of that starship combat section. That's not to say it's bad. It's super complex, and that's not a bad thing. If I were sitting down at a table with these folks and we had an unlimited amount of time available and we were going to be playing for the next year, then yeah, it's totally worth learning the starship combat system. But for the purposes of what we were doing with this video series, of just trying to do these very quick and entertaining, like 2 to 3 hour sessions, yeah, that was something we just kind of skimmed over. And I know that for the long term, um, aspect of this particular adventure path, having 5 or 6 books, when you end this first episode, the cliffhanger ending, you get a ship, and That ship, it literally tells you that this ship is, level 3, or class 3, I think is what it's called. And it's meant to level up with you and your adventuring party as you continue through the next few books. And in order to really take advantage of that, I feel like you really need to know the Starship combat system. So that's the one area I will say we just kind of skimmed over because it was a little too complex for us. But at the end of the day, it's, nothing wrong with that. The rest of the book was super easy to follow, and I think all of us felt like there was a fairly decent progression in terms of, the earliest sessions you are arriving at Absalom Station, which is the center of, everything in the Pact Worlds, and you're doing an investigation. And so there's not a lot of combat in the early sessions. Um, well, at least not a lot of complex combat. There is a combat scenario at the in the very first session. Like as soon as you arrive on the station in the loading dock, there is that firefight that happens, but that really doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the characters. It's mostly those two parties battling it out, and then you happen to get caught in the crossfire. You can hunker down and really not have it affect you if you want to. Um, but then that kicks off the investigation, which then you go from there. Um, I will say that one of the things, and Babylonia, who played Lysander, pointed this out in the debrief at the end of our final session, which is part of the video that we released for that season finale. Had mentioned that one of the interesting things for him was the setting felt it didn't feel like hard sci-fi. And I realize that this is more of a science fantasy setting rather than a science fiction setting because they're still dealing with magic, even though we still have science fiction elements. But I will say that's one of the things I kind of enjoyed about this is that it wasn't a hardcore sci-fi setting to get into. It was very like, oh, Pathfinder or any other fantasy-based RPG tabletop game, then it's going to be easy for you to jump into this because even though it has some science fiction elements, it's also still got the magic and the fantastical element that is familiar to a lot of people, which really makes it easy to get into the game and just ease into it. So that was pretty cool. The rules for Starfinder are definitely a lot beefier than uh, D&D 5th edition, if that's where you're coming from. Less beefy, less crunchy, as they say, in comparison to the Pathfinder 2nd edition. I think this was like a I think this came after Pathfinder First Edition, but before Second Edition, if I'm not mistaken. So it's kind of like a blending of the two. Um, for the most part, the rules are very simple and easy to understand. You're rolling a d20 like you do everywhere else against an armor class like you do everywhere else. There is some, kinetic armor class and things of that nature, like KAC and etc. Now, we played in Fantasy Grounds, and one of the things I love about Fantasy Grounds when you're playing one of the official um, modules that you can purchase through there is everything's already been put into the game and programmed so that it's already doing all the roles for you. So I don't have to manually figure out, what's being absorbed or what's not being absorbed or resistances or anything like that. Like it's automatically taking care of all that. So part of the ease of us playing was that we didn't have to manually do all those configurations and calculations as we were playing because we were doing it through Fantasy Grounds. So I would say, shout out to the Fantasy Grounds team for making it that easy. Um, but I think like if you're playing this manually, there is, some complexity to it, but you don't necessarily have to, you know, use 100% of the rules because with any tabletop game, you can kind of adapt things to your own group's needs. But there's definitely, you have your regular armor class, but then there's absorption, and then there's like stamina, which is, um, your character doesn't take hit point damage until your stamina has been drained, and so there's sort of like two different levels of um, hit points, as it were. Um, and it was fun to learn all of that and learn a different system and etc. The story itself I felt was, there were elements of it that were somewhat generic, but overall it was pretty fun. We did have a couple of moments where we felt like the book was a little too limited in nature, specifically around and I realize this may be more on me as a DM and being new to the setting, and so not understanding all the intricacies of the packed worlds and the races and the politics and the socioeconomic systems and everything on Absalom Station, everything else. But when you're in the early stages doing the investigations, and you're meeting with like the Hardscrabble Collective and the Astral Extractions and the two gangs that are associated with them, there were definitely a couple of moments where the group wanted to sort of go off the beaten path. And unless you are intimately familiar with things, that's one of the limitations of following. And I would argue that this is true for any book that you're going to do, any module that you're running from someone else. When it's not your own homebrew campaign, you are somewhat limited in scope to working within the confines of whatever setting that you have in front of you. And I know that at least when I compare, say, what's up, everybody? Commercial break here. I got to give a shout out to our guild champions. It's the highest tier membership here on YouTube. We got Ancient Entity, Crazy as Relative, and Remy D. Thanks so much for your support. And of course, to all of the members here on YouTube, thanks for keeping me on the air full time. If you do like what you see and hear on my channel, don't forget to not only like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon, but please support. Consider me your Netflix, your Hulu, your Disney Plus, or HBO, whatever you want to call it. You can do memberships here on the channel starting at $3 a month. And of course, anytime you see me live or you watch a premiere, you can do super chats and stickers on those videos and super thanks on any upload you see, which allows me to keep doing this full time and paying the bills. So from Chris and I and all of our rescue cats, we say thank you. Let's get back to the video at hand. Um, some of the modules I've played for D&D over the years, or the own modules that we've created for the Weave in the Void, there are oftentimes lots of options available. And in this case, there were, in many cases, only like one way forward. And so when the group wanted to kind of go off the books, I had to scramble a little bit to come up with something. And those solutions may or may not have been lore appropriate given that I'm a newbie to Starfinder. So I feel like the book could have fleshed out some alternative suggestions areas a little bit more. An example of this would be when we went into the Fusion Queen, which was the nightclub run by was it the 21st Street Gang, I think it was called. That was like 2 months ago, so I'm off the top of my head. But like the group was like, I think that the adventure path pretty much just says, here's the front door, here's the two bouncers, and you're kind of expected to just go through the front door and into the club, and then go from there. But the group was like, well, why don't we try to sneak? Why don't we wait for a delivery to be made to the loading dock, and then we can go in through the back door at like 2 o'clock in the morning when there's no one here? And I was like, that's a really good idea, but there's no maps for that. I haven't, I don't have any maps prepped for that. So in order to do that scenario, I would have needed to prepare a bunch of stuff. And not a bad thing. I'm just saying as an example of something. And ultimately, at the end of that session, we talked outside of the recording, and we were just kind of like, you know what? Rather than spin this out into something that's going to take up an extra 3 sessions while I create, a whole adventure of well, let's do this to get the ID cards, and let's do this to get past the guards, and let's sneak in the loading dock, and let's get in through the back entrance, which there's no maps for, so I got to get maps for that and all this other stuff. And then I have to create the encounters because there's no encounter set up for any of that stuff. Um, the group decided that it would be better off just to play it as it was intended, which was just run in through the front and deal with the two bouncers and then the three guards that were inside. So there were some areas where this adventure path seemed a little lean, a little light on extra details, and I definitely think that that's something. And I don't know if they've fixed this in future, because they've been producing these for I don't know however many years the game's been out now. I mean they've produced dozens of adventure path books now. I don't even know how many, to be honest with you. A lot. Um, I feel, and again, I don't know if they fix this in future issues, but I feel like having additional scenarios um, to sort of prompt the players towards, like saying, okay, like if the book said, okay, so you can go through the front door, but also you could consider this, this, and this, and then even if they just provided a short paragraph snippet of, if you think your group might be better suited to this, try this instead. Like, I think that would be a good way to sort of flesh it out, and it wouldn't take a ton of extra time, other than the map creation. So anyway, um, once we got past that and we got on to the ship itself, um, the stranded vessel, the Acreon, it definitely sort of jumped up in difficulty a little bit. We were also playing this with 3 players instead of 4. So I fudged the rolls a little bit. I fudged I didn't have the NPCs be as difficult or use all of the abilities that they could use against the players because I didn't want to, wipe them. I don't kill players in my campaigns. I want them to have fun. There's other ways to challenge people without, killing their character off. Um, so this being designed for 4 people and only having 3, I did a little bit of tweaking on the fly, but the Acheron, because of the void creatures that are on there, there's a definite ramp up in difficulty, and then when you get to the drift rock itself, it's like, oh wow, no, now there's some really tough stuff. But overall, I feel like it was a fairly balanced session all the way through, a fairly balanced adventure path book for a module. And like I said, at the end of the day, I would give this a 7 out of 10. I would give it higher, but again, I felt like there was some weakness to some of the elements and a little bit of the writing and stuff. And there's just yeah, I think in that, but 7 or 8. I still think it's going to be 7, not an 8, just because I think for me the writing is really important, the story is really important. It was good, and there's lots of information here, but I do feel like it's a little lean in some areas, but still a heck of a lot of fun. I absolutely think you should go out and pick this up if you haven't already done so and play through it because it's well worth it. It's a great introduction to Starfinder. The artwork, this is the one area where I kind of feel, along with the writing, I wish there was more artwork in the book because there were some images, but there weren't enough. Like, I love artwork, so I like when there's just tons of pages of artwork. And I realized that they're trying to produce these modules sort of within a budget, so they've got a certain amount of money they can spend per page. I get that, so I'm not complaining. It's not that it's not enough, it's just that I always am going to be in favor of more because I'm a big fan of artwork because I can't draw for squat. So being a writer myself, the written word is the easy part for me, but I can't do art, so I like to see it. But I feel like it was good where it was, but there definitely could have been some more. Like we got to the end last. I'm recording this on the 8th. Excuse me, not the 8th. Isn't the 8th? It's the 8th of June, and we finished last night. So I don't know exactly when this will be published, but when we finished last night, one of the things we were discussing was like there was no artwork for the ship that our characters got at the end of the campaign, and we were able to go find it online and pull it into the game, but there was no artwork in the book. For at least not in the. I haven't looked at the actual PDF. I have the Fantasy Grounds version. In the Fantasy Grounds version, there was no artwork for the ship. Um, or if there was, I didn't see it. So if there was and I didn't see it, I apologize, and maybe someone can point that out to me. But like there was a tiny little icon for the token, which was a tiny version of the big image that we were able to see. And that was the other area where there was a lot of questions asked about like the ship itself, and there was some explanations in the game, some descriptions given of the ship that our characters got, but there wasn't any information on like what's the weight of the ship, what's the mass of the ship, what's the size of the ship, in terms of square meters, length, width, height, all those things. Um, but like I said, apart from sort of wanting more details in a couple of areas, um, highly entertaining adventure path and a great introduction to Starfinder. I think that if you're looking to get into it like I was, and you want an introductory adventure that's going to be really easy to play for your group, I'd say this is definitely a great place to start. Being the very first one that they ever produced, like I said, I have to wonder how much better the future adventure packs get because they sort of worked out all the kinks by the time they got 10 or 12 books in. Um, but yeah, it was fun. In terms of time commitment, I think I ended up reading online that most people said between 20 and 25 hours. It just kind of depends on how much role play your group is going to do. We ended up at around 18 hours across like from session 0 to session 7, so across 8 sessions, roughly 18 hours in total. I think that definitely could have been longer had we done the actual spaceship combats. That would have given us probably around 20 hours. So I feel like 20 to 25 hours is a pretty good run for this, for what most groups are going to get. It's just going to depend on how much role playing you do, and etc. Obviously, we had a little bit of downtime fumbling around with rule sets and looking things up online and stuff, but for the most part, it was a fairly straightforward, smooth experience. And I kind of like the idea. If you look at this, we played once a week. We had a couple of weeks where we didn't play because people had family emergencies and stuff. But for the most part, this was something we knocked out over the course, I think, about 3 months to go through one book. So for the cost, I feel like it's very fair. It's a very fair price. I think the PDFs are like $15 or so, and I paid like 22 or 23 from Fantasy Grounds because you're paying for the conversion. Um, but yeah, overall, really fun adventure. Great introduction to Starfinder. I had a lot of fun. I wouldn't mind running more Starfinder campaigns in the future or playing more Starfinder. Obviously, I'm still a novice and still new to the Starfinder setting, but it's a lot of fun. So yeah, thumbs up for me. That'll be the thumbnail for the image, right? Anyway, folks, hope you liked it. If you did, like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. Let me know your thoughts on Starfinder or this adventure path if you've played this before, and stick around because I will do some more Starfinder episodes. But I'm now moving into the Discovering Pathfinder series, where I'm going to start going through the core rulebook and things for that. So hopefully you'll stay tuned for that as well. In the meantime, thanks for following along, everybody. Stay safe. Happy gaming.